Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever really stopped to think about the hidden gears of power? How things that seem totally separate, maybe a press conference in Washington or a local fight over a data center, even your grocery bill suddenly jumping up, how they're all connected by these invisible threads of policy and intent and influence. Well, that's exactly what we're doing today. We're launching into a deep dive. We've got this stack of information in front of us. It covers legal fights, big economic shifts, crucial social policies, even some really controversial political appointments. And our goal isn't just to, skim the surface. It's to cut through all the noise, really synthesize this complex picture from all these different sources and pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, the insights, and review what it actually means for you.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here truly is how these different sources, even though they're looking at different things, they really come together to paint a remarkably clear picture, sometimes, frankly, a stark one. They don't just list events. They show these significant shifts, sometimes pretty alarming ones, in how power's being used, how information is maybe being controlled, and how policy decisions are hitting everyday lives all across the country. And as the information suggests pretty consistently, these actions often seem to prioritize very specific interests, narrow interest, over the broader public good. So this deep dive today, it should help illuminate those patterns, help us not just see what's happening, but understand the bigger game.
Okay, so let's jump right in then with something that really felt like, like a strongman play, almost ripped from a thriller. So picture this. Donald Trump, he's holding a press conference, and he announces what he call a federal takeover of the D.C. police. Now, he presented this as, a necessary step, a decisive response to supposedly spiraling crime rates in the capital. He implied the city was in crisis. But here's where the story just doesn't line up with the facts. The actual data on the ground, which was available to anyone who looked, it clearly showed D.C. crime rates were actually at historic lows at that time. So this didn't really feel like it was about genuine public safety policy. To many observers, it looked like pure political theater, projecting an image, not solving a problem.
And that, as our sources really emphasize, that's exactly where the danger lies. Skye Perryman, the founder of Democracy Forward, she put it very starkly. Chillingly, really. She said, if it can happen in D.C., it can happen where you live or where your loved ones live. That should give us all pause, right? And the reason it's so chilling is because of DC's unique status. It's really different. See, unlike state national guards, they report to their governors, right? Like Gavin Newsom in California or J.B. Pritzker in Illinois. The DC National Guard reports directly to the president. And this unique chain of command makes DC, as the sources put it, low-hanging fruit if you want to flex federal executive power. A president can basically give direct orders to the DC Guard without having to get into a public fight, maybe a confrontation with a state governor who might push back, or even just say no. So this isn't just about who controls local police. It's fundamentally about the balance of power, local communities versus the executive branch. And it's a move designed to create a certain image, as one source described it, of a president looking like a dictator on TV, exercising absolute control. And the DC Attorney General's response was immediate, called the move unnecessary and unlawful. That wasn't just politics. It highlighted the serious constitutional questions, the legal overreach. DC has fought for decades for more autonomy, home rule, they call it, since the 70s, giving residents more say. So this kind of direct federal intervention, it just cuts right across that progress and sets a really worrying precedent for federal interference in local issues, not just there, but potentially anywhere.
Undermining that local control. Okay, so from testing the limits of federal power there in the Capitol, let's pivot now to something that's been maybe quieter, but just a profoundly important part of American social policy for, 6 decades? The Job Corps program. This is one of those programs a lot of people might not even know exists, but it has been an absolute lifeline for generations. It came out of LBJ's, his big 1964 war on poverty, specifically the Economic Opportunity Act. And its purpose was pretty straightforward, but really powerful. Free job training, career counseling, housing, meals, all for young people, 16 to 24. The idea was to give them a comprehensive way out of poverty, to help break those cycles that can trap families for generations. And the scale, we're talking over 2 million participants since it started, across 99 centers nationwide. These places offer all sorts of skills, traditional trades like welding, carpentry, advanced manufacturing, but also modern fields, healthcare support, IT, culinary arts, even corrections work training. And maybe one of the most crucial parts, participants could live right there on site. That stability, that security, it's vital for young people who often lack it. It created this whole supportive environment for learning and growing. So it wasn't just about learning a skill, it was about building a whole new foundation for life.
right? A whole ecosystem. And then just abruptly, seemingly out of nowhere, the administration tried to shut the whole thing down. The plan was to close all 99 centers run by the U.S. Forest Service, literally overnight. No phase out, no study of what the impact would be, just a sudden jarring announcement. Can you imagine the immediate consequences? Just devastating. Thousands of young people, many using these centers not just for job skills, but as their only home, their only source of food, their community, suddenly kicked out onto the street. And beyond the students, thousands of staff would lose their jobs. Local economies, too, especially in the rural areas where these centers are often major employers, community anchors. They'd take a massive hit, probably wouldn't recover. And what's really striking here, as the sources point out, is the hypocrisy angle. Donald Trump had, publicly praised trade schools many times, even said he wanted the U.S. to have the best trade schools in the world. So to then try and dismantle this established, successful network of those very schools, it's, as one source, but not perfectly, like wanting a great pizza restaurant but burning down your only pizzeria. Just makes no sense. A total contradiction.
Yeah, it seems almost self-defeating, doesn't it? But thankfully, there was a quick legal response, a pushback that managed to slow things down, at least. Lawsuits were filed really fast in New York and D.C. And the argument was basically that the president couldn't just unilaterally shut down a program funded by Congress. And the courts agreed. They issued orders right away to block the shutdown. A pretty significant win.
Precisely. The courts really stepped in as that crucial check on executive power. But, and this is really important to understand, even a blocked shutdown can cause huge lasting damage. This is what our sources are calling death by disruption. The second that closure is announced, even if it gets stopped legally later, uncertainty just spreads like a virus. Students worry their program is going to vanish, so they start leaving. Staff, they need stability, so they start looking for other jobs. And the program's ability to function, to recruit, to keep up quality, it just erodes from the inside out. It's a subtle way, but really effective to undermine these kinds of public programs, even when a direct attack fails in court. And beyond that, we absolutely have to ask who is most affected by this kind of disruption. A really large percentage of Job Corps participants are young people of color, particularly African Americans, often from communities that are already hit hardest by inequality, lack of opportunity. So it raises serious questions about the administration's priorities, right? Were these actions effectively targeting communities that were already disadvantaged? When you look at why they might do it, the theories range. Maybe a push for privatization. Replace public programs with for-profit schools, which might not offer the same support. Maybe it was just budget optics claim cuts to look fiscally responsible. Or maybe just pure ideology, a belief that government just shouldn't be in the business of workforce training, no matter how well it works. But whatever the motive, the long-term value of Job Corps is just undeniable. It's truly a return on investment-friendly program for taxpayers. It gives skills, yes, but also dignity, self-reliance, a real pathway to self-sufficiency for young people starting with very little. Destroying that existing proven infrastructure, it seems incredibly short-sighted, especially when we desperately need skilled workers in trades and healthcare right now. It's an investment that really pays dividends for individuals and for the country.
That actually leads us perfectly into the next theme, which seems to be about, a kind of transparency tightrope walk, or maybe more accurately, deliberately obscuring information, avoiding accountability. And there's maybe no better or perhaps more disturbing example than the ongoing saga of the Epstein files. It's very public, highly scrutinized. And here's a critical detail. A federal judge in New York, Judge Engelmayer, he specifically noted the Trump administration already has something like 300 gigabytes of Epstein-related files. 300 gigabytes. That's a mountain of information. Yet, despite having all this potentially explosive material, the judge assessed that Trump was actively creating an illusion of transparency, which stands in a really stark contrast to his apparent rehabilitation campaign for Ghislaine Maxwell. Someone convicted 5 times as a sex trafficker. It really makes you wonder what exactly is being hidden and why.
And that's precisely what Democracy Forward is trying to get at with their, pretty aggressive legal strategy. Innovative, too. They filed the first ever lawsuit against the Justice Department and the FBI, specifically to force the release of these records. They're using the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. Now, FOIA, for anyone not familiar, it's basically the public's right to access government information, a vital tool for transparency, for oversight in a democracy. But Democracy Forward didn't just file a standard request. Those can get slow-walked for years, right? No, they went straight for a motion for summary judgment. Think of it like telling the judge, look, the facts here are overwhelming, the government's delay is blatant, there's no need for a long trial, just rule now, make them release the files. It's a really aggressive legal tactic, designed to force the administration's hand can, speed things up, make it much harder for them to keep doing what Democracy Forward calls slow-walking the process. And the judge assigned to the case, Judge Tanya Chutkan. As we know, she's also overseeing Trump's D.C. election interference case. She's known for bold, principled rulings. Her being assigned here suggests this case is being taken very seriously. There's an expectation of decisive action. So this is really a direct challenge to that illusion of transparency, trying to cut through the fog and get the truth out for the American people, especially given the huge public interest in knowing the full scope of Epstein's network, right? And any potential connections to powerful people.
Right. And it's not just the Epstein files where this pattern seems to be showing up, this lack of transparency, avoiding accountability. We're seeing it elsewhere, too. Specifically, there's another FOIA lawsuit from Democracy Forward, this one aimed at the State Department. And this is about their annual human rights reports. Congress mandates these reports. They're supposed to give a global picture of human rights practices.
Yes, and this is where it gets really troubling because these reports, they're foundational. Skye Perryman herself has publicly accused the State Department of, quote, cooking the books, of whitewashing abuses, of leaving out inconvenient facts in these really critical reports. And to understand why this matters so much, these reports aren't just, academic exercises. They're vital tools. They inform U.S. foreign policy. They guide decisions about aid. International bodies use them to hold countries accountable. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, transparency truly is the backbone of democracy. Without it, the public is left just having to trust the government's word on really critical issues. And history, unfortunately, tells us that's just not a safe bet, as our sources wisely put it. When governments can pick and choose what to report about human rights, leaving out uncomfortable truths, downplaying atrocities, it undermines everything. Not just our understanding of the world, but America's credibility as a champion of human rights. It creates this vacuum where inconvenient facts just disappear. And that's a dangerous path for any democracy, at home or abroad. It lets a narrative be built that serves political goals, not factual accuracy or moral principle.
Okay, so we've touched on executive overreach, the struggle for transparency. Now let's shift gears to something that hits everyone directly, every day, the economy. Donald Trump has consistently pointed to the economy as his strong suit, right? His golden achievement, proof of his leadership. But if we kind of peel back the campaign slogans and look at the actual real-world numbers, what do the economic indicators really tell us about so-called Trumponomics?
Well, this raises a really important question, doesn't it? Is the prosperity we hear about really reflecting Main Street, where everyday Americans live and work? Or is it just Wall Street, which often plays by different rules? When we actually look at the comprehensive economic indicators from various sources, frankly, they're flashing red. Prices are up significantly across the board. Jobs, down. Consumer confidence, that's key for future spending, it's down. Manufacturers' confidence, down. Inventory managers' confidence, a sign of future production, down. Even the big service economy and the goods economy are showing worrying declines. This isn't just a small dip, it looks like a broad systemic slowdown that hits ordinary households. Directly, tangibly. I mean, think about that anecdote in our sources. A woman paying $17 more for the exact same grocery she bought just last year. That's not some abstract number on a page, that's a real hit to someone's weekly budget. It forces hard choices, sacrifices.
That's a really powerful example. Very relatable. It makes those numbers real. But we often hear about the stock market, though. It's often presented as the main sign of economic success, and it frequently seems to be doing well, right? How does that fit into this more worrying picture you're painting?
Yeah, that's a crucial point. It's so important to understand that the stock market is absolutely not Main Street. Sure, you might see these quick spikes in the market, but a lot of that is driven by something called dip buying. Basically, automated trading systems are programmed to jump in and buy huge blocks of tech stocks, often those Magnificent Seven stocks, right after any little dip. So it creates this temporary surge that looks good on paper, but it doesn't necessarily reflect organic, widespread growth across the whole economy or for most Americans. And it's not just outside observers saying this. Major Wall Street analysts from big firms like Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan Chase, Evercore, they've all expressed serious concerns. They're worried about stagnant job numbers, fallen output in services and goods, this unsettling mix of rising prices and flat wages, and the full impact of tariffs, which maybe hasn't even hit consumers and businesses completely yet. They understand that what makes Wall Street happy in the short term can be very different from the long-term health of Main Street.
And the service economy, that's huge, right? Healthcare, hospitality, professional services, everything. That seems to be struggling under these conditions, too.
Absolutely. The service sector is enormous. It's the vast majority of U.S. GDP and jobs. And historically, these companies often rely heavily on expanding globally for their growth, for their profits. But Trump's trade policies, especially the tariffs, the more isolationist stance they've effectively slammed the door shut on a lot of those international opportunities. The result, the service economy index dropped to a 5-year low. Overall, GDP growth is stagnating. It points to a fundamental slowdown in economic activity. So you put it all together, rising prices, flat wages, weaker global trade, falling confidence. It creates a really nasty mix for the economy's future health. And when people's discretionary spending starts to shrink, that's the money left after rent, food, utilities. That's a huge red flag for the whole economy. It means less money going to small businesses, the backbone of local economies, fewer purchases at big stores, just a general tightening of belts everywhere. It's a direct result of an economy where paychecks just aren't keeping up with the cost of living. And something else worth remembering, when Trump took office, he inherited an economy already boosted by significant federal spending. But instead of continuing that, he went for big cuts to vital programs, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, disability programs, things affecting millions of vulnerable people. Then he imposed tariffs, which, despite the rhetoric, aren't paid by other countries. They're essentially a tax on imports, raising costs for American businesses and consumers. So while he boasts about, $158 billion in tariff revenue, that's nowhere near the $1 trillion+ in tax cuts he gave mostly to corporations and the wealthy. The tariffs don't even come close to filling that hole. The government's financial position actually got worse. And at the end of the day, a sluggish economy. It punishes people, not presidents. Through slower growth, job losses, and a real squeeze on the middle class, it's a direct hit to your daily life, not just numbers on a report.
Okay, and speaking of priorities, specific interests maybe being put ahead of the broader public good, let's talk about something that really hits at national security. America's long-term strategic edge. This reported deal to sell cutting-edge American AI chips directly to the Chinese military. These are just regular computer chips, right? These are, as the source puts it, the brains behind self-learning machines, next-gen weaponry, advanced surveillance systems, basically the crown jewels of America's tech advantage.
Yeah, what's truly fascinating and frankly deeply concerning here is just the sheer audacity of this reported deal and the strategic short-sightedness. Our sources suggest Trump reportedly allowed tech giants NVIDIA and AMD to sell their most advanced AI chips, think cutting-edge stuff like the H200 AI processor, the new Blackwell architecture directly to China, and the exchange. The U.S. Treasury was supposed to get a 15% cut of the revenue from these sales. Now, to really grasp how big a deal this is, you have to think about export controls. Every president before Trump, doesn't matter which party, understood the critical national security need to guard this kind of technology, especially dual-use tech stuff that can be used for civilian and military purposes. Laws like the Export Control Act of 2018, they exist precisely to stop sales of sensitive tech like this to adversaries, like China, like North Korea. This deal, as the source says bluntly, blows a hole right through that firewall. It just bypasses decades of careful policy meant to protect U.S. tech leadership. And we're talking about companies like NVIDIA and AMD. They're fabless. They design the chips, but they're made overseas. Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, and the buyer here, the Chinese military, which is aggressively pushing for AI integration across everything to do autonomous weapons, advanced intelligence gathering, you name it.
So it's presented as this big financial win for the U.S. Treasury, but what does it really mean for national security? Especially with the strategic competition with China.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, okay, maybe $30 billion for the Treasury from $200 billion in sales sounds good on paper. But honestly, for companies like NVIDIA making hundreds of billions, that's pocket change. But for the Chinese military, it's described as an absolute bargain to leapfrog their tech capabilities by decades. It's kind of like, I don't know, selling a top-of-the-line stealth fighter jet for $10 million and thinking you're smart because you got free golf clubs thrown in. The financial gain just pales in comparison to the strategic cost. And this doesn't seem to be an isolated thing either. Our sources bring up the TikTok connection. It highlights this pattern, maybe, in Trump's transactional approach to Chinese tech. First, TikTok is a huge national security threat, calls for a ban. Then an investor in TikTok backs his campaign, and suddenly it's no big deal. It suggests this concerning pattern of maybe prioritizing immediate payment or political favors over fundamental long-term national security. The whole America for sale idea here is really alarming. This deal doesn't look like it was about strengthening defense. It seems to treat America's most critical strategic assets like a business to be flipped for quick cash, prioritizing immediate money over lasting security, over global leadership, and the potential fallout. It's immense. A possible dramatic leap forward for China's military AI. A significant, maybe irreversible loss of U.S. tech dominance. and severely weakened credibility when it comes to export controls worldwide. Plus, there's the absolute certainty that China will reverse engineer these chips. They'll figure out how to make them themselves, eventually cut out U.S. suppliers entirely. This is like, as the source puts it, selling the digital equivalent of nuclear weapons for quick cash. It really underscores why leaders need the back dome, not just to write laws like the Export Control Act, but to actually enforce them rigorously.
Wow. Okay, so from those huge economic and national security implications, let's bring it back down to the human level. Focus on vulnerable communities for a moment. And there's some glimmers of hope here, actually. Let's highlight a really positive outcome, a significant win that Democracy Forward helped secure. This involved federal grants under the Violence Against Women Act, BAWA, crucial funds.
Yes, this case, it started in Rhode Island. It was a really crucial fight. It truly shows the immediate impact policy has on people's lives. What happened was the Department of Justice's Office of Justice Programs tried to impose these, well, what our sources called arbitrary, burdensome restrictions on the VAWA grants. These new rules made it incredibly hard, almost impossible, for the organizations doing the work on the ground to actually use the money effectively to help domestic violence survivors. We're talking about funds for safe places to stay, counseling, legal help, really critical support. So Democracy Forward saw how dangerous these restrictions were, potentially life-threatening. They partnered up with the National Women's Law Center and a whole coalition of other advocacy groups, and they challenged these new rules in court. And the victory was clear. A judge sided with them, issued a decisive order blocking the administration's policy. This win really hammers home the human stakes. As the source says powerfully, real people's safety and survival are on the line. It's such a vital reminder that strategic legal action can directly protect vulnerable communities, can preserve those essential lifelines.
That's great to hear. A real positive there. Now, let's revisit that law and order theme we talked about earlier. But this time, looking at how it's sometimes used disturbingly as a sledgehammer against these very same vulnerable communities. We saw those highly publicized examples, right? The D.C. National Guard deployed specifically to target homeless encampments, threatening mass arrests. And it wasn't just D.C. We also saw widespread ICE raids in Los Angeles. Targeting immigrant communities, unhoused people, it sparked huge protests, led to arrests even of independent journalists who were just trying to document what was happening.
Yeah, and this raises that important question again. What's the tactic here? What's the underlying goal? Fundamentally, it seems to be about making people invisible, so their problems become invisible too. The logic appears to be if there are no tents under the freeway, then maybe there are no headlines about poverty. But of course, that solves nothing. It just pushes the problem somewhere else, often into more dangerous, hidden places, pushes vulnerable people further into the shadows. And what's really fascinating and quite concerning here, as our sources point out, is what they call the global-local connection. Apparently, U.S. police forces often get training from Israeli security forces, often framed as counterterrorism or urban policing training. But this can lead to tactics that were tested abroad in conflict zones, showing up right here on U.S. streets. Things like specific ways of handling protests, advanced surveillance methods, aggressive uses of force. It's really not paranoia, as the source says, to wonder how long before those approaches get imported even more broadly here. We've seen it happen before in other areas of policing, and it almost always hits marginalized communities first. They're often the first targets for increased scrutiny, increased enforcement.
And when we talk about homelessness, it's just so crucial to push back against those common, often really harmful stereotypes. Homelessness is absolutely not a moral failing. It's not a choice. It's often the devastating result of systemic problems, of a safety net that's just been shredded. And who's most affected? Our veterans, struggling with visible and invisible wounds, people with chronic mental or physical health conditions who just don't have enough support. And tragically, kids. Children whose parents are working but simply cannot keep up with minimum wage jobs that don't come close to covering the soaring cost of rent.
Exactly. At its core, it's just math, as the source puts it. Wages, especially the minimum wage, they haven't kept pace with the explosion in housing costs. Not even close. It's created this huge affordability crisis for millions. And at the same time, federal support programs that are supposed to be that safety net, the ones that could prevent people from falling into homelessness in the first place, or they're being systematically gutted, cut back. So the solutions we often see proposed: sweeping encampments, mass arrests, forcing people to move. Our sources call that just window dressing. They don't fix the root problems, they just hide them temporarily. The only real evidence-based solutions involve comprehensive strategies. You need massive investment in affordable housing. You need robust wraparound services, mental health support, addiction treatment, job training, childcare. And you need a fundamental shift. treating shelter as a basic human right, not some privilege you only get if you can afford it. Anything else just keeps shuffling the crisis around. It leads to this endless cycle of displacement and suffering.
Okay, let's shift now to a really fascinating and frankly deeply concerning pattern that seems to emerge when we look at how the government is staffed, especially in high-level jobs. This is what you might call the loyalty-first approach to governing. Donald Trump's hiring philosophy for these critical roles really stands out and seems quite different from traditional norms. The pattern seems to be prioritizing, above all else, unyielding personal loyalty to him, maybe looking good on TV, being willing to just repeat talking points, often it seems over actual competence, relevant experience, or even just basic professional decency.
This is such a critical point. It fundamentally affects how effective government is, how much integrity it has. And the Jessica Bowman case, it's a perfect, really stark example of this pattern. She was appointed Deputy Chief of Staff of the Bureau of International Labor Affairs. That's in a labor department. Now, this job, it sounds maybe a bit obscure, but it's incredibly important. It deals with fair treatment for workers around the world, promoting safe conditions, making sure American workers and businesses benefit fairly from trade deals. These are responsibilities that absolutely require a strong commitment to human rights, careful diplomacy, deep policy knowledge. Yet, before she was nominated, her deleted social media posts, thankfully, watchdog groups got screenshots. They revealed some deeply disturbing stuff. Profoundly unprofessional. She called the January 6th Capitol attack a Democratic plot, baselessly claimed the 2020 election was stolen. She mocked Vice President Kamala Harris with sexually graphic and racially charged images, even dismissed the death of a congresswoman with this glib, callous remark.
Wow, it sounds like just a laundry list of deeply offensive and completely baseless conspiracy theories.
It is, absolutely. Her greatest hits, as some sources cynically called them, include claiming January 6th was planned by Democrats, like a war game simulation to trap Trump supporters, claiming Kamala Harris isn't really black, despite her heritage, claiming USAID, the agency that handles foreign aid, secretly funnels money to Democratic campaigns. All of this completely without a shred of credible evidence. Easily debunked stuff. And what's maybe even more telling, as our sources highlight, is the Laura Loomer connection. Loomer, she's known as this far-right flamethrower, famous for her aggressive loyalty tests within Trump world. She publicly endorsed Bowman, which basically signaled that Bowman had passed Loomer's really problematic litmus test for ideological purity and personal devotion to Trump. Bowman even went on Breitbart, the far-right website, using what our sources called McCarthy-style rhetoric, talking about a communist takeover of the U.S. And for anyone who doesn't remember, that's a direct callback to Senator Joe McCarthy in the 1950s, using baseless accusations of communism to smear, silence, destroy opponents, instill fear. This isn't just misusing words like communist or socialist. It's a specific tactic. Fear-mongering, trying to delegitimize critics by just slapping a label on them, whether it fits or not. So this raises that important question for all of us. Why does this matter? Because these government jobs, they shape policy. They control huge amounts of funding. They represent America to the world. They impact our credibility. Appointments like Bowman's, where it seems like blind loyalty and ideology trump qualifications, they fundamentally erode the integrity and effectiveness of government. Trump appears to seek out loyalists who will just carry water for him, no matter how absurd or harmful the agenda might be. And Bowman, sadly, doesn't seem to be an outlier. She looks like part of a larger discernible pattern. We saw other examples like E.J. Antoni appointed to a high-level role despite questions about his credentials and experience. It points to a situation where, as our sources conclude, competence is optional, ideological loyalty is mandatory. This whole trend just underscores how vital rigorous vetting and strong oversight are for all government positions, especially the ones with so much influence over policy and our national interest.
Right. Okay, so after diving into all these challenges, the executive overreach, the fight for transparency, the economic pressures, the impact on vulnerable communities, and these really concerning loyalty-first appointments, it can feel pretty overwhelming, almost like those hidden gears of power are just grinding against the public interest. But there are still glimmers of resistance. And actually, entire organizations fighting these trends. Democracy Forward, we've mentioned them a few times, they really seem to embody this. They're strategically using the courts as, quote, one of the last reliable tools of accountability, using the law to force transparency and make sure the government follows its own rules.
Exactly. And their efforts go beyond just lawsuits, too. They even put out a double vinyl album of donated songs. It's free on Spotify, too, as this symbolic, kind of powerful reminder that, quote, in this fight, we're not alone. Lawyers, artists, activists, we're all in this together. using whatever tools and voices we have to push back. It's a really strong message of collective action, of creative resistance.
That's fantastic. And it's not just the big national legal groups either. We're seeing powerful local wins, too, which are so important because they show real tangible impact, like that Project Blue victory down in Tucson, Arizona. Residents there successfully mobilized. They blocked a massive Amazon data center. It would have put just unsustainable strain on their local water, their power resources. It would have directly impacted their quality of life.
Yeah, that Tucson win is such a powerful lesson for everyone. It wasn't luck. It wasn't some sudden change of heart from officials. It was the direct result of organized, persistent pressure on the city council by regular people. It reminds us that government can work for people when the people show up, demand action, and just don't let up until it happens. This also connects to what our sources call the distraction game. We are just constantly bombarded with this overwhelming flood of information, right? It creates what feels like a tyranny of bureaucracy mixed with the tyranny of distraction. And that strategy seems designed to make people feel overwhelmed, exhausted, to ultimately just tune out. But we have to make that critical distinction between resting, taking a necessary break so you can come back stronger, and checking out, just leaving the ring completely. Because when people check out, it leaves the folks still engaged, feeling outnumbered and overwhelmed by the forces pushing against them. So the counter strategy is clear. It's vital. Rest, recharge, but don't disappear. Because if these crackdowns, these attacks on transparency, these erosions of norms, if they go unchecked, they will creep closer to home. They'll affect your community, your rights, your well-being.
Right. So it's not just about resisting the bad stuff. It's about actively trying to build something better. I love that quote from Senator Raphael Warnock. It feels like a really powerful guidepost. We're not pushing back just to get back to where we were.
Yeah.
We're pushing back so we can move forward.
That vision is absolutely essential, yes. The goal isn't only to stop the immediate harms, right? Whether that's encampment sweeps or unconstitutional federal deployments or unjustified raids. It's also, and this is critical, about laying the groundwork for a better system when we get the chance to build again. It's not enough just to stop harm. We have to actively imagine, plan, and demand something better to replace it. That comprehensive approach makes sure our efforts aren't just defensive, just reacting, but that they're also looking forward, aiming for real systemic progress, not just getting back what was lost. It's about building resilient communities, transparent government, an economy that actually serves everyone, not just a select few.
So what we've really unpacked today, from that executive overreach in D.C., the attacks on programs like Job Corps, to the fight for transparency with the Epstein files and State Department reports, the real economic impacts of Trumponomics, that controversial AI chip deal, all the way to the human cost for vulnerable communities and that unsettling trend of loyalty-first hiring. It all paints this clear, overarching picture. It reinforces that critical message. What happens in D.C., what happens with national policy, it directly impacts your local community, your rights, your personal life. As Skye Perryman warned, right, the same tactics used in Washington today could show up in your backyard tomorrow. Understanding these hidden gears, that's really the first step towards being effectively engaged.
Which I think raises an important question for all of us listening. In this era where we have more information than ever, but maybe less accountability, how do we, as informed citizens, as engaged people, how do we not only spot these patterns of power, recognize the tactics being used, but also actively participate in shaping a future where transparency and public interest and real democratic principles actually win out? It's a question that really asks us to think about that balance, doesn't it? Between our individual responsibility to stay informed and our collective power to act for change.
Keep asking those questions. Stay engaged, stay informed, and always be critical in how you consume information. Until next time, keep digging deeper.